In this video, we're going to have a bit of a look about how monetary policy can be used to achieve low inflation. Not just looking at the transmission mechanisms, but a few other ways that a tightening of monetary policy can help reduce inflationary pressures. So first of all, the overall goal of monetary policy is the economic prosperity and welfare of Australians. So everything they try and do, whether they're loosening or tightening monetary policy, their main goal is to try and improve our living standards and our welfare going forward, whether that be in the short term or the long term, and it may require some short term sacrifice for long term gain, but the overall goal is to improve our economic prosperity and welfare. For the medium term goal, 2 to 3% inflation over the course of the business cycle. You'll also refer to this as price stability or stability of the currency. And the reason we target 2 to 3% inflation is because we believe that that's a key ingredient, or that is critical in terms of for our longer term growth. So for improving our living standards in the long term, we need to keep inflation under control. Otherwise, that can hurt our growth because it can lead to less investment, can lead to less international competitiveness. So once inflation is under control, the RBA will shift their focus to jobs and growth, but only once we achieve inflation or low inflation. So RBA's charter is the pursuit of domestic stability, and that always refers to keeping inflation between 2 to 3%, healthy and sustainable economic growth, and enhancing full employment, which will all ultimately lead back to improved living standards. Whenever you hear the term low inflation or price stability or stability of the currency, all of these terms are just fancy words for saying that prices are going up by 2 to 3% over the course of the business cycle. That's really important. So what are some of the main ways that higher interest rates will reduce inflation throughout the economy? So ways that a restrictive monetary policy, which is generally referred to as a tightening, will help to control inflationary pressures. So the first way, and this is a range of ways technically, but basically you have to be able to explain how tightening of monetary policy can reduce demand through each of the 5 channels we looked at in Chapter 12, and therefore ease pressure on capacity constraints, reduce demand pull inflationary pressures, and therefore potentially lead to a surplus of resources because there's less demand throughout the economy. So the first one is just through the transmission mechanisms from Chapter 12. Another reason that a tightening of monetary policy will lead to reduced inflation, and this is more related to cost-push inflation. While higher interest rates can lead to higher costs of production for businesses, the benefit for reducing cost-push inflation is mainly that if we tighten interest rates or tighten monetary policy, that will lead to reduced demand for labour, and that can help to reduce labour costs and reduce wage pressures, because essentially the higher interest rates will reduce growth and reduce demand, which should reduce the demand for labour and push down labour costs. So one reason why a tightening of monetary policy is effective for reducing cost-push inflation, even though the higher interest rates can increase production costs, is that a tightening does help to reduce pressure on wage costs. So that's one key element of what a more restrictionary stance can have on cost-push inflation, is that it can reduce labour costs for businesses because of the lack of demand. Another thing is that high interest rates appreciate the dollar, and we have talked about the demand side impacts of this, but is another reason why it can lead to less cost-push inflation, because it means consumer and producer imports are cheaper, so products that we buy just as directly as imports as consumers, and products used in the production process. And then it also means that the Australian dollar appreciating, that local producers have to drop their prices because it's going to be cheap for us to import. So not only does it reduce the cost of production for businesses, it also forces other businesses that are competing against imports to reduce their prices because of the increased competition. So higher interest rates can be good for reducing cost-push inflation, 1, because of the lower labour costs, because of the lack of demand, and 2, because they help to reduce pressure on the dollar. Another reason why increasing interest rates is good is that it contains inflationary expectations. So what I mean by that is when the RBA increased interest rates, the people start to think that inflation is going to be less of a concern, because the RBA is doing their job to slow down the level of spending, and as a byproduct of that, slow down the level of inflation. So what happens is that when the RBA tightened monetary policy, it contains inflationary expectations, and that means that consumers or workers are less likely to demand a pay rise, because they know that prices aren't going to be going up as high. They're less likely to demand an increase in their nominal wage. So another positive of a contractionary stance for reducing inflation is that it reduces inflationary expectations, and therefore consumers are less likely to demand higher wages, and we don't have that wage spiral effect that increases cost of production as well. So first of all, importantly, tightening does not mean it's more restrictive. It is only more restrictive if the rate rises above 3.5%. and loosening does not necessarily mean more expansionary. So to summarise this video, first of all, the RBA's main aim is to maximise the economic welfare of society. This is first done by keeping inflation under control, and then they will start to focus on growth and employment. Higher interest rates, while they help to reduce demand through the channels, they are also effective at reducing cost-push inflation. One, because they help to appreciate the dollar and keep import prices down. Two, they can contain the demand for labour, which reduces wage pressures. And three, higher interest rates help to reduce inflationary expectations, which means that consumers are less likely to demand products now because they're less worried about prices going up, and they're also less likely to demand higher wages because they're not worried about their real wage falling in line with inflation going up. So you need to be aware of some of the key reasons why we target, so one of the key reasons why high interest rates help to slow inflation both on the demand and the supply side of the economy. Thank you.